The year is 1187. On a scorching hill overlooking the Sea of Galilee, 20,000 exhausted Crusader knights face an impossible choice. Their water supplies are gone, their horses dying beneath them, and surrounding them on all sides is an army that has been waiting 90 years for this moment. In a few hours, the dream of Christian dominion over the Holy Land will begin to crumble, taking with it castles that had stood for nearly a century. But this story begins long before that fatal day at the Horns of Hattin. It begins in the mist-covered hills of early medieval Europe, where the first rough stone towers were rising from muddy baileys, and where the very concept of the castle was taking shape in the minds of men who understood that power ultimately comes from controlling the land. Tonight, let time dissolve around you. Forget the urgency of modern schedules and allow your mind to drift across centuries through the slow construction of massive stone fortifications and the patient planning of expeditions that would take years to organise. We're entering a world where a single siege could last longer than most modern careers, and where the building of a castle was a statement of intent that would echo through generations. The story of medieval castles and crusades spans a millennium of human ambition, architectural innovation, and cultural collision. From the motte and bailey castles that first appeared in the 10th century to the massive concentric fortifications of the 13th, these structures were far more than military installations. They were the physical manifestation of a new way of organising society, a revolutionary approach to power that would reshape not just the European landscape, but the entire concept of authority itself. The first castles appeared in the chaos following the collapse of the Carolingian Empire, emerging organically from the desperate need for local defence in an age when central authority had vanished. These early fortifications were crude affairs, artificial hills topped with wooden towers, surrounded by earthen ramparts that could be thrown up in a matter of weeks. Yet even these primitive structures represented something unprecedented in European history: the privatization of military power. In the Roman world, fortification had been the exclusive domain of the state. Legionary camps and frontier walls were built by imperial decree, manned by professional soldiers, and maintained by central authority. But the medieval castle belonged to individuals, counts, dukes, minor lords who claimed the right to build their own fortresses and garrison them with their own men. This represented nothing less than the fragmentation of the monopoly on violence that had defined classical civilization. The earliest documented castle construction occurred in the Loire Valley around 950, where local nobles began raising motte and bailey fortifications to protect their lands from Viking raids and rival lords. The design was elegantly simple: an artificial mound 30 to 40 feet high, topped with a wooden tower, and connected to a walled courtyard where livestock, supplies and retainers could shelter during attacks. The entire complex could be built with local labour in a single building season, yet it provided a level of defensive capability that had previously been available only to kings and emperors. But the true genius of the castle lay not in its immediate defensive value, but in its psychological impact on the surrounding population. The tower that dominated the landscape from its artificial hill was visible from miles away, a constant reminder of the Lord's presence and power. Peasants working in the fields below could never forget whose protection they depended upon, whose justice they were subject to, whose demands they would have to meet at harvest time. The economic implications of castle building were equally revolutionary. Each fortress required not only initial construction costs, but ongoing maintenance, provisioning, and garrisoning. This created a direct incentive for lords to develop the agricultural productivity of their territories, to encourage trade and craft production within their domains, and to extract maximum revenue from their subjects. The castle, in effect, became the engine that drove the development of medieval rural economy. Construction techniques evolved rapidly as lords competed to build more impressive and defensible fortifications. The wooden towers of the 10th century gave way to stone keeps in the 11th, massive rectangular structures that could house the lord's household while providing virtually impregnable refuge during siege. The Great Tower of Loches, built around 1020, still stands today as a monument to the engineering capabilities of early medieval masons, its walls 10 feet thick and its corners reinforced with massive stone buttresses. The transition from wood to stone represented more than just improved durability. Stone construction required specialised knowledge, professional masons and substantial financial investment that only the wealthiest nobles could afford. This created a natural hierarchy among castle builders, with the greatest lords constructing monuments that proclaimed their status as clearly as any crown or sceptre. The White Tower of London, begun by William the Conqueror around 1078, exemplified this new generation of stone castles. Rising nearly 90 feet above the Thames, with walls varying from 11 to 15 feet in thickness, it was designed to accommodate the full apparatus of royal government while serving as an impregnable final refuge. The tower's sophisticated internal arrangement included royal apartments, administrative offices, armouries, and the famous Chapel of St. John, whose rounded arches and massive columns proclaimed the Norman mastery of continental architectural techniques. But even as European lords were perfecting the art of castle construction, events far to the east were creating conditions that would transform these fortifications from local power centres into staging points for the greatest military adventures of the medieval age. The expansion of Seljuk Turkish power into Anatolia and the resulting appeals for help from the Byzantine Empire would soon draw Western knights into conflicts that would reshape both European and Middle Eastern civilization. The call that would launch the First Crusade came from an unexpected source. Alexios I Komnenos, the Byzantine emperor, had been struggling for over a decade to restore imperial control over Anatolia following the disastrous defeat at Manzikert in 1071. His appeals to the West were initially modest, requests for mercenary troops to help reclaim lost territories. But when his ambassadors reached the papal court in the 1090s, they found a receptive audience for far more ambitious plans. Pope Urban II, facing his own political challenges in his struggle with the Holy Roman Emperor, saw an opportunity to unite Western Christendom under papal leadership while addressing the growing problem of knightly violence within Europe. The speech he delivered at Clermont in November 1095 transformed a request for limited military assistance into a call for holy war that would echo across Europe for the next 2 centuries. The response to Urban's call exceeded all expectations. Within months, armies were forming across Western Europe as nobles great and small took the cross and began preparing for the journey to Jerusalem. But the enthusiastic response also created unexpected problems. The logistics of moving thousands of armed knights and their followers across Europe and into Asia Minor had never been attempted on such a scale. The very castle-based society that produced these warriors had provided no mechanisms for coordinating such massive military efforts. The solution emerged through a combination of individual initiative and family networks that stretched across the European nobility. Godfrey of Bouillon, Duke of Lower Lorraine, mortgaged his entire duchy to finance his expedition. Raymond of Toulouse, Count of one of the largest territories in France, committed virtually his entire treasury to the venture. Bohemond of Taranto, a Norman adventurer whose father had conquered southern Italy, saw the crusade as an opportunity to carve out his own principality in the east. These leaders brought more than just military forces to the expedition. They brought the administrative expertise, financial resources, and construction capabilities that had been developed through generations of castle building in Europe. The techniques perfected in the construction of stone keeps and the provisioning of garrisons would prove invaluable in the conquest and defence of Crusader territories in the Levant. The First Crusade's success surprised even its most optimistic supporters. Within 4 years, the Crusader armies had crossed Anatolia, captured Antioch after an 8-month siege, and taken Jerusalem itself after a final assault that left thousands dead in the city's streets. But victory created new challenges. The Crusader states that emerged from these conquests, the Kingdom of Jerusalem, the Principality of Antioch, the counties of Edessa and Tripoli, were surrounded by hostile Muslim powers and separated from Europe by thousands of miles of difficult terrain. The solution was to transplant European castle-based society to the eastern Mediterranean, adapting continental construction techniques to local conditions and strategic requirements. The result was a flowering of military architecture that combined the best features of Byzantine, Islamic and Western traditions into structures of unprecedented sophistication. Crac des Chevaliers, constructed by the Knights Hospitaller between 1142 and 1271, represents the culmination of Crusader castle design. Built on a commanding hilltop in northern Syria, the castle consists of 2 concentric lines of fortification, with the inner castle rising from a massive sloping base that rendered traditional siege techniques ineffective. The structure could accommodate a garrison of 2,000 men and their supplies, making it virtually self-sufficient during extended sieges. The castle's defences incorporated innovations drawn from both east and west. The massive sloping talia at the base of the walls, designed to deflect projectiles and prevent mining, was adapted from Islamic military architecture. The sophisticated system of flanking towers and overlapping fields of fire reflected lessons learned in European siege warfare. The elaborate water collection and storage systems, crucial for surviving desert sieges, combined Roman engineering principles with local knowledge of climate conditions. But Crac des Chevaliers was more than just a fortress. Its great hall could accommodate hundreds of knights for the ceremonial feasts that maintained the bonds of military brotherhood. Its chapel served the spiritual needs of a garrison that saw itself as engaged in perpetual holy war. Its administrative quarters housed the complex bureaucracy required to manage the agricultural estates that provided the castle's economic foundation. The military orders that garrisoned castles like Crac des Chevaliers represented a unique fusion of monastic and military traditions that had no precedent in either Eastern or Western society. The Knights Templar, founded around 1119 to protect pilgrims travelling to Jerusalem, evolved into a powerful military and financial organisation that controlled castles, trading networks, and banking operations throughout the Mediterranean world. The Templars' success was built on their ability to combine the disciplined organisation of monastic communities with the military effectiveness of professional knights. Their rule, established by Saint Bernard of Clairvaux around 1129, prescribed rigorous standards of conduct, training and devotion that created units of unprecedented reliability and effectiveness. Unlike secular knights, who fought primarily for personal gain and glory, the Templars were motivated by religious conviction and bound by vows of poverty, chastity and obedience. This monastic military model proved ideally suited to the requirements of frontier warfare in the Crusader states. The orders could maintain permanent garrisons in remote castles, where secular knights might be reluctant to serve. Their international recruitment networks provided a steady stream of reinforcements from Europe. Their financial resources, derived from donations and efficient estate management, supported construction and maintenance projects that would have bankrupted individual nobles. The Templars' most famous castle, Château Pellerin, was built between 1217 and 1221 on a promontory jutting into the Mediterranean Sea. The fortress controlled the coastal road between Acre and Jaffa, making it strategically crucial for maintaining communications between the major Crusader cities. Its massive sea-facing walls, built of fitted stone blocks weighing several tons each, were designed to withstand both conventional siege weapons and the more advanced artillery that Muslim engineers were beginning to develop. The castle's design reflected hard-learned lessons about siege warfare in the eastern Mediterranean. Previous Crusader fortifications had often fallen to mining operations that undermined their foundations. Château Pellerin was built on solid rock that made undermining impossible. Earlier castles had been vulnerable to assault by siege towers and scaling ladders. The Templars designed their fortress with walls so high and steep that direct assault was virtually impossible. But the most innovative aspect of the castle was its integration with naval power. The fortress included harbour facilities that could accommodate the Templar fleet, making it possible to resupply the garrison by sea even during extended land sieges. This naval capability also allowed the Templars to launch seaborne raids against Muslim coastal positions, extending their military reach far beyond the immediate vicinity of the castle itself. The military architecture of the Crusader states reached its highest development in the massive rebuilding programs of the late 12th and early 13th centuries. The disasters that followed Saladin's victory at Hattin in 1187 had demonstrated the vulnerability of first-generation Crusader fortifications to well-organised Muslim armies equipped with advanced siege technology. The Third Crusade, led by Richard the Lionheart and Philip Augustus, succeeded in recapturing much of the Palestinian coast, but it also highlighted the need for more sophisticated defensive strategies. Richard's reconstruction of Ascalon between 1191 and 1192 established new standards for Crusader military engineering. The city's walls were designed as a series of interlocking defensive systems, with each line of fortification capable of independent operation if outer defences were breached. The massive circular towers that anchored the wall system were built with sloped bases and overhanging battlements that maximised defensive firepower while minimising vulnerability to siege engines. The castle's most innovative features were largely invisible to attackers. An elaborate system of underground passages connected different parts of the fortification, allowing defenders to move reinforcements and supplies without exposure to enemy fire. Multiple independent water sources ensured that the garrison could withstand extended sieges without depending on external supplies. Granaries and storerooms built into the castle's foundations could support the defenders for months or even years. These improvements came at enormous cost. The reconstruction of Ascalon reportedly consumed more silver than the annual revenue of the Kingdom of France. Similar projects at Caesarea, Acre, and other major strongholds required financial resources that strained the limited treasuries of the Crusader states. Much of the funding came from special taxes imposed on European pilgrims and merchants, creating resentment that would contribute to declining Western support for the Crusader cause. The economic burden of maintaining advanced fortifications was compounded by changes in military technology that were making traditional castle defences obsolete. Muslim engineers had been experimenting with counterweight trebuchets since the late 12th century, developing siege engines capable of throwing stone projectiles weighing several hundred pounds with devastating accuracy. These weapons could breach walls that had been considered impregnable just a generation earlier. Even more threatening was the introduction of early gunpowder weapons in the 13th century. While primitive by later standards, these early cannons could shatter stone walls that had withstood years of conventional bombardment. The psychological impact of gunpowder weapons was as significant as their physical effects, undermining the confidence in stone fortification that had sustained castle building for 3 centuries. The response to these technological challenges led to fundamental changes in castle design and defensive strategy. The simple rectangular keeps of the 11th century gave way to complex polygonal designs that distributed the impact of projectiles more effectively. Walls became thicker and lower, with earth-backed ramparts that could absorb artillery strikes without collapsing. Towers were redesigned with rounded or facetted profiles that deflected projectiles rather than presenting flat surfaces for direct impact. These innovations were implemented most systematically in the great castle-building projects of Edward I of England during his conquest of Wales in the 1280s and 1290s. Caerphilly Castle, begun in 1268, demonstrated the new principles of concentric fortification that would dominate military architecture for the next century. The castle consisted of multiple rings of defences, each capable of independent operation, surrounded by extensive water obstacles that prevented the use of siege engines and mining operations. The construction of Caerphilly required innovations in engineering and logistics that pushed medieval building techniques to their limits. The artificial lakes that surrounded the castle were created by building massive earth and stone dams across natural valleys, a project that required moving hundreds of thousands of cubic yards of material. The castle's walls were built with sophisticated foundations that extended deep into bedrock, ensuring stability even when subjected to artillery bombardment. But the most remarkable aspect of Edward's Welsh castles was the speed of their construction. Caernarfon Castle, one of the largest and most complex fortifications of the medieval period, was built in just 7 years using construction crews that included over 1,500 skilled masons, carpenters, and engineers brought from across Europe. The logistics of coordinating such massive projects required administrative capabilities that had been developed through centuries of castle-building experience. The success of Edward's Welsh campaigns established new models for castle construction that were copied throughout Europe. The concentric principle became standard for major fortifications, while smaller castles incorporated elements of the new defensive systems within their traditional layouts. The integration of domestic and military architecture, perfected in the Welsh castles, influenced the development of palace design that would reach its culmination in the great residential castles of the later medieval period. But even as castle building was reaching new heights of sophistication in Europe, the Crusader states were entering their final crisis. The fall of Acre in 1291 marked the end of the Christian presence in the Holy Land, bringing to a close 2 centuries of cultural exchange that had profoundly influenced both Eastern and Western civilization. The collapse of the Crusader states was not the result of a single military disaster, but the culmination of long-term trends that had been undermining their viability for decades. The population of the Crusader territories had never been sufficient to maintain effective control over their extensive frontiers. Despite continuous immigration from Europe, Christians remained a minority in most areas under Crusader rule, dependent on the tolerance or active support of Muslim and Eastern Christian populations whose loyalty was uncertain. The economic foundation of the Crusader states had also been gradually eroding. The Italian merchant cities that had financed much of the early conquest were increasingly oriented toward direct trade with Muslim powers, finding it more profitable to deal with Damascus and Cairo than to support the expensive apparatus of Christian rule in the Levant. The agricultural estates that supported the military orders were subject to constant raiding and disruption, making it difficult to accumulate the surpluses needed for major military operations. Most critically, the Crusader states had failed to develop effective mechanisms for coordinating their defense against increasingly sophisticated Muslim military campaigns. The great castles that had been built at enormous expense could hold out for months against individual sieges, but they could not prevent the systematic reduction of Crusader territory that began with Saladin's campaigns and continued under his successors. The siege of Crac des Chevaliers in 1271 demonstrated both the strengths and limitations of the Crusader military system. The castle's massive fortifications enabled a garrison of just a few hundred knights to hold out for over a month against an army of tens of thousands led by the Mamluk Sultan Baybars. But the siege also highlighted the isolation of individual Crusader strongholds and their inability to support each other during sustained campaigns. Baybars had learned from earlier Muslim failures against Crusader castles. Rather than attempting to storm the fortress directly, he implemented a comprehensive blockade that prevented any possibility of relief or resupply. His engineers constructed elaborate siege works that protected their artillery from counterattack while maintaining continuous pressure on the castle's defences. Most importantly, he had secured the surrounding countryside so thoroughly that the Hospitallers could expect no assistance from other Crusader forces. The fall of Crac des Chevaliers was followed by the systematic reduction of the remaining Crusader strongholds. Margat fell in 1285, Latakia in 1287, Tripoli in 1289. Each siege demonstrated the increasing effectiveness of Muslim siege techniques and the growing isolation of the Crusader garrisons. The final siege of Acre in 1291 lasted only 6 weeks, a remarkably short time for the reduction of what had been considered the strongest fortress in the Crusader states. The end of the Crusader states did not, however, mark the end of the architectural and military innovations that had been developed during 2 centuries of Eastern warfare. The techniques of castle construction that had been perfected in the Levant were brought back to Europe by returning Crusaders, where they influenced the development of military architecture for the next several centuries. The great castle-building boom of the 13th and 14th centuries represented the culmination of this long process of technological and architectural development. Castles like Warwick, Kenilworth, and Bodiam in England, Vincennes and Pierrefonds in France, and Marienberg and Eltz in Germany, combined the defensive innovations of the Crusader period with the domestic refinements that reflected the increasing sophistication of medieval court culture. These later medieval castles were designed as much for comfort and ceremony as for military effectiveness. The great halls that had served primarily for the dispensation of justice and the coordination of military affairs were expanded into elaborate spaces for courtly entertainment. Private apartments for noble families became more numerous and luxurious, reflecting changing concepts of privacy and domestic life. Gardens, fish ponds, and decorative features transformed castle baileys from purely functional military spaces into settings for the refined lifestyle that defined late medieval nobility. But the military function of castles remained central to their design and purpose. The 14th century witnessed a new phase of castle construction, driven by the military requirements of the 100 Years' War between England and France. The English occupation of large parts of France required a network of fortified positions that could control hostile territory while serving as bases for further military operations. The Basties towns built by the English in Gascony represented a systematic application of military engineering principles to urban planning. Towns like Montpazier and Villeneuve-sur-Lot were laid out according to standardized plans that maximized defensive capability while encouraging commercial development. Their rectangular street grids, fortified churches, and central market squares created urban environments that could function effectively in both peace and war. The success of these planned towns influenced urban development throughout Western Europe. The principles of systematic fortification that had been developed for castle construction were applied to entire cities, creating the elaborate urban fortification systems that characterized late medieval and early modern warfare. The walls of Avignon, built during the papal residence there in the 14th century, demonstrate the sophistication of urban defensive systems, with multiple gates, barbicans, and flanking towers that could coordinate fire against attacking forces. The integration of artillery into siege warfare during the 14th and 15th centuries forced further evolution in castle design. The high walls and towers that had been the hallmark of medieval fortification became liabilities when subjected to cannon fire. Castle builders responded by developing lower, thicker walls with earth backing that could absorb artillery strikes. Towers were redesigned with gun loops that allowed defending artillery to engage attacking forces at long range. The Castle of Ham in northern France, rebuilt in the 1470s, exemplifies the adaptation of traditional fortification to the gunpowder age. The castle's walls were built with a distinctive profile that sloped outward from the base, deflecting cannonballs rather than providing flat surfaces for direct impact. The towers were equipped with multiple levels of gun ports that allowed the garrison to bring concentrated firepower to bear against specific targets. But perhaps the most significant development in late medieval castle design was the integration of residential and military architecture that produced the great palace fortresses of the Renaissance period. Castles like Chambord and Fontainebleau in France, and Hampton Court and Nonsuch in England, maintained the symbolic and practical advantages of fortification while providing the comfort and grandeur appropriate to royal residences. These palace castles represented the ultimate evolution of the castle concept that had emerged in the 10th century as a solution to the problems of local defence and territorial control. The rough wooden towers of the early Motte and Bailey castles had evolved into sophisticated architectural complexes that combined military effectiveness with aesthetic grandeur, administrative efficiency with domestic comfort. The transformation of castle design paralleled broader changes in medieval society that were undermining the feudal structures that had given birth to castle-based warfare. The development of professional armies, the growth of central government authority, and the increasing importance of commercial rather than agricultural wealth were making individual castle-holding nobles less important as military forces and political authorities. Yet castles retained their symbolic importance even as their military significance declined. The great castle-building projects of the late medieval and early Renaissance periods were as much about demonstrating status and authority as about providing practical defence. The elaborate facades, ceremonial spaces, and decorative programs of these structures proclaimed the wealth, power, and cultural sophistication of their builders as clearly as the massive walls and towers proclaimed their military capability. The persistence of castle building into the gunpowder age demonstrates the complex relationship between technological change and architectural development. While new military technologies made traditional fortification methods obsolete, the social and political functions of castles ensured their continued relevance. Castles remained important as symbols of authority, centres of administration, and expressions of cultural values long after they had ceased to be militarily decisive. This symbolic dimension of castle architecture helps explain the extraordinary investments of time, money, and artistic talent that were devoted to castle construction throughout the medieval period. The great castles of Europe were not merely military installations but comprehensive expressions of medieval civilization, incorporating the best achievements of contemporary engineering, architecture, decoration, and landscape design. The legacy of medieval castle construction extends far beyond the impressive ruins that dot the European countryside. The organisational methods developed for large-scale construction projects influenced the development of urban planning, industrial architecture, and civil engineering. The financial institutions created to fund castle construction contributed to the development of banking and credit systems that would become central to modern economic development. Perhaps most importantly, the castle-based society of medieval Europe established patterns of territorial organisation and local governance that would influence European political development for centuries. The principle that effective authority required secure control over specific territories, demonstrated by the success of castle-based defence, became a fundamental assumption of state-building that persists to this day. The architectural innovations developed in castle construction also had lasting influence on civilian building. The Gothic cathedrals that represent the highest achievement of medieval architecture incorporated structural techniques that had been perfected in military engineering. The flying buttresses of Notre Dame de Paris and Chartres Cathedral were adaptations of the external buttressing systems that had been developed to support the massive walls of stone keeps. The domestic architecture of medieval castles established spatial arrangements and decorative traditions that influenced residential design throughout the medieval and early modern periods. The great halls that served as the centres of castle life became models for the principal rooms of manor houses, urban palaces, and even merchant dwellings. The private chambers that developed within castle walls established concepts of domestic privacy that would become central to modern residential architecture. The gardens and ornamental landscapes that surrounded later medieval castles pioneered techniques of landscape design that would reach their culmination in the formal gardens of the Renaissance and Baroque periods. The integration of natural and artificial elements that characterized castle sites influenced the development of landscape architecture as an independent artistic discipline. But the most enduring legacy of medieval castles may be their demonstration that architecture could serve simultaneously as military, political, and cultural expression. The great castles of Europe were practical fortifications, symbols of authority and works of art, proving that functional and aesthetic considerations need not be mutually exclusive. This integration of practical and symbolic functions helps explain the continuing fascination with medieval castles in popular culture and historical imagination. These structures represent an age when architecture possessed a clarity of purpose and expression that seems to have been lost in more recent centuries. The castle's role as the physical embodiment of social relationships and political authority provided a coherence between form and function that modern architecture often struggles to achieve. The study of medieval castles also provides insights into the relationship between technology and society that remain relevant to contemporary concerns. The evolution of castle design in response to changing military technology demonstrates how architectural innovation emerges from the interaction between practical requirements and available resources. The success or failure of different approaches to fortification provides lessons about the importance of adaptability and continuous development in maintaining effectiveness over time. The international character of castle construction during the medieval period offers another perspective on cultural exchange and technological transfer. The architectural innovations developed in the Crusade estates influenced castle design throughout Europe, while European techniques were adapted to local conditions in the Eastern Mediterranean. This pattern of mutual influence demonstrates how military competition can serve as a catalyst for cultural development and technological progress. The financial requirements of castle construction also provide insights into the relationship between military expenditure and economic development. The enormous costs of building and maintaining sophisticated fortifications created incentives for lords to develop the productive capacity of their territories and to encourage trade and commercial development. This connection between military investment and economic growth would become even more important in the later development of European state systems. The social implications of castle-based society remain relevant to contemporary discussions about security, authority, and community organisation. The medieval castle served simultaneously as fortress, administrative centre, and residence, creating a model of integrated authority that contrasts sharply with the specialised institutions that characterise modern government. The advantages and disadvantages of this integration continue to influence debates about the organisation of political authority and the relationship between security and freedom. The environmental impact of castle construction provides perspectives on the relationship between human settlement and natural landscape that anticipate modern concerns about sustainable development. Medieval castle builders were forced to work within the constraints imposed by local materials, topography, and climate, creating structures that were integrated with their natural settings in ways that modern construction often ignores. The preservation and restoration of medieval castles has become an important test case for heritage conservation and cultural stewardship. The challenges involved in maintaining these complex structures while preserving their historical authenticity provide lessons about the balance between preservation and adaptation that apply to many other aspects of cultural heritage management. The continuing popularity of castle tourism demonstrates the enduring appeal of medieval military architecture and its capacity to evoke historical imagination. Millions of visitors annually experience these monuments of medieval civilization, gaining insights into historical lifestyles and values that would be difficult to convey through purely textual or documentary sources. The educational value of castle studies extends beyond their historical significance to encompass lessons in engineering, architecture, art history, and social organisation. The interdisciplinary nature of castle research provides models for integrated approaches to historical study that combine material culture analysis with documentary research and archaeological investigation. As we conclude this exploration of medieval castles and crusades, we find ourselves looking back across nearly a millennium of human achievement in military architecture, territorial organisation, and cultural expression. The rough wooden towers of the 10th century evolved through continuous innovation and adaptation into the sophisticated palace fortresses of the 11th century Renaissance, demonstrating humanity's capacity for practical problem-solving and artistic creation. The story of medieval castles is ultimately the story of how human societies adapt to changing circumstances, while maintaining continuity with established traditions. The castle builders of each generation faced new challenges: improved siege techniques, changes in military organisation, evolving concepts of domestic comfort, but they met these challenges by building upon the accumulated wisdom of their predecessors, while introducing innovations appropriate to their specific circumstances. This pattern of continuity and change provides insights into the broader processes of historical development that extend far beyond the specific domain of military architecture. The success of medieval castle builders in creating structures that served practical needs while expressing cultural values offers lessons about the possibility of achieving similar integration in contemporary architecture and planning. The international scope of castle construction during the medieval period also demonstrates the capacity of human societies to share knowledge and techniques across cultural and political boundaries. The architectural innovations developed in one region were quickly adapted and improved upon in other areas, creating a common vocabulary of military engineering that transcended national and ethnic divisions. The legacy of medieval castles thus extends beyond their immediate historical significance to encompass broader themes about human creativity, adaptability, and the relationship between practical needs and aesthetic expression. These monuments of medieval civilization continue to inspire and instruct, providing tangible connections to a past that shaped the foundations of modern European culture and institutions. In the quiet of evening, when the tourist crowds have departed and the ancient stones seem to remember their long history, medieval castles retain their power to evoke the hopes, fears, and ambitions of the people who built them. They stand as permanent reminders that human achievement emerges from the patient accumulation of knowledge, skill, and determination across generations, creating legacies that endure long after their original purposes have been forgotten. The technical specifications of medieval castle construction reveal the extraordinary sophistication that lay beneath their imposing exteriors. The Great Tower of Rochester Castle, built around 1127, required over 3,000 tons of Kentish ragstone, each block carefully shaped by master masons who understood the precise tolerances required for stable construction. The tower's walls, 12 feet thick at the base and tapering to 8 feet at the top, were built using a technique called coursed rubble masonry, where carefully selected stones were laid in horizontal courses with lime mortar that achieved strength comparable to modern concrete. The foundations of Rochester's keep extended 24 feet into the chalk bedrock, a depth that required the excavation of over 1,500 cubic yards of material using only hand tools. The precision of medieval foundation work is demonstrated by the tower's stability after nearly 9 centuries, despite having survived multiple sieges, including King John's famous mining operation in 1215 that brought down one corner of the structure. The complexity of medieval building projects required organisational systems that rivaled modern construction management. The building accounts for Conway Castle, constructed between 1283 and 1287, record payments to 1,520 individual workers during the peak construction season of 1285. These included 400 masons, 200 carpenters, 30 smiths, 200 quarrymen, and 690 general labourers. The payroll for a single week in August 1285 totalled £267, equivalent to roughly £2 million in modern currency. Master James of St George, Edward I's chief military engineer, coordinated construction across multiple castle sites simultaneously, requiring him to develop standardised building techniques and modular design elements that could be adapted to local conditions. His innovations included prefabricated timber components that could be transported between sites, standardized stone-cutting specifications that allowed quarries to prepare materials in advance, and systematic approaches to siege weapon placement that maximized defensive firepower. The logistics of medieval castle construction challenged the transportation capabilities of the age. The stone for Caernarfon Castle was quarried from sites up to 20 miles away and transported by ox cart over primitive roads that became impassable during wet weather. A single journey could take 3 days, and the largest blocks required teams of 16 oxen to move. The total distance travelled by all transport operations for Caernarfon's construction exceeded 50,000 miles, roughly equivalent to twice around the Earth's circumference. Medieval masons developed specialised techniques for handling massive stone blocks that would not be equalled until the advent of steam-powered machinery. The largest stones in Windsor Castle's round tower weigh over 8 tons each, and were lifted into position using human-powered windlasses and elaborate timber scaffolding systems. The precision of medieval stone cutting is demonstrated by joints so tight that a knife blade cannot be inserted between adjacent blocks, achieved using only hand tools and the accumulated skill of master craftsmen. The water supply systems of medieval castles represented some of the most sophisticated hydraulic engineering of the period. Warwick Castle's artesian well, completed around 1394, was sunk to a depth of 127 feet through solid rock, requiring over 2 years of continuous work by specialist well diggers. The well's stone-lined shaft, perfectly circular and uniform in diameter, demonstrates a level of precision that required constant surveying to prevent deviation from vertical alignment. Caerphilly Castle's water defences involved the construction of earth and stone dams that created artificial lakes covering over 30 acres. The main dam, 650 feet long and 30 feet high, required moving over 100,000 tons of earth and stone. The engineering calculations required to ensure the dam's stability while maintaining the desired water levels demonstrated mathematical capabilities that historians once thought beyond medieval competence. The defensive innovations incorporated into Crusader castles reflected hard-earned lessons from 2 centuries of siege warfare. The walls of Crac des Chevaliers included over 40 different types of stone, each selected for specific structural properties. The outer faces used hard limestone blocks that could withstand direct artillery impact, while the inner cores consisted of softer stone and rubble that absorbed shock and prevented catastrophic collapse. The castle's glacis, the sloping earthwork that surrounded the base of the walls, was built according to precise mathematical principles that maximised the effectiveness of defensive artillery while minimising dead ground where attackers could find shelter. The angle of slope, exactly 38 degrees, represented the optimal compromise between stability and defensive capability, calculated through empirical testing during previous siege operations. Syrian castle construction incorporated sophisticated understanding of seismic activity that reflected local geological knowledge accumulated over centuries. The walls of Margat were built with flexible joints that could accommodate earth movement without structural failure, using lead sheets and cushioning materials at critical stress points. This earthquake-resistant construction enabled the castle to survive multiple seismic events that damaged other structures in the region. The integration of domestic and military architecture in Crusader castles required innovations in environmental control that adapted European building traditions to Middle Eastern climate conditions. The Great Hall of Carac included an early form of air conditioning system, with underground chambers that cooled incoming air and stone channels that circulated the treated air throughout the building. During summer months, this system could reduce interior temperatures by up to 20 degrees Fahrenheit. Water storage in desert castles required engineering solutions that pushed medieval hydraulic knowledge to its limits. The cisterns beneath Crac des Chevaliers could hold over 300,000 gallons of water, collected from rainfall, springs, and an elaborate aqueduct system that extended over 3 miles into the surrounding hills. The cistern walls were waterproofed using a revolutionary cement mixture that included volcanic ash imported from Italy, creating a seal that remained effective for centuries. The military order's approach to castle construction reflected their unique combination of monastic discipline and military professionalism. Templar building specifications, preserved in documents from their commanderies, required wall thickness to be calculated according to mathematical formulas that related defensive capability to available resources. These calculations considered not only immediate military requirements, but long-term maintenance costs and garrison requirements. Hospitaller construction projects incorporated medical facilities that represented the most advanced hospital design of the medieval period. The infirmary at Crusades Chevalier included separate wards for different types of wounds, surgical suites with specialised lighting and ventilation, and pharmaceutical preparation areas with precise temperature and humidity control. The medical knowledge reflected in these designs combined Islamic, Byzantine and Western traditions into integrated systems that would not be surpassed until the modern period. The financial scale of Crusader castle construction dwarfed contemporary European projects. The total cost of building and maintaining Crusades Chevalier over its 130-year history exceeded the annual revenues of the Kingdom of France. The Hospitallers' building programme in the Principality of Antioch consumed over 40% of the order's global income between 1140 and 1180, requiring them to develop innovative financing mechanisms that included Europe's first large-scale bond issues. Templar banking operations, originally developed to fund castle construction, evolved into the most sophisticated financial system of the medieval world. By 1250, Templar houses were processing over 100,000 transactions annually, with credit instruments that could be honoured from London to Jerusalem. Their accounting methods, which combined Italian double-entry bookkeeping with Islamic mathematical techniques, achieved accuracy rates that exceeded 98%. The weapons technology employed in medieval siege warfare underwent continuous evolution, driven by the arms race between castle builders and their attackers. The counterweight trebuchet, perfected during the Third Crusade, could throw 300-pound stone balls over distances of 400 yards with accuracy sufficient to target specific sections of wall. The largest trebuchets required construction crews of 50 men working for 3 weeks to assemble, and their operation demanded specialised teams of engineers who understood the complex mathematics of projectile trajectory. Siege mining operations required geological expertise that combined practical tunnelling experience with theoretical understanding of soil mechanics and structural engineering. The mine that brought down Rochester Castle's southeast tower in 1215 involved digging a tunnel 180 feet long and 12 feet wide through chalk bedrock, then excavating a chamber large enough to hold the 40 pigs whose burning fat provided the heat to crack the stone foundations. The precision required to place the mine exactly beneath the tower's corner demonstrates surveying capabilities that rival modern standards. Defence against mining led to the development of countermining techniques that turned siege operations into underground warfare. The walls of Kenilworth Castle included listening galleries where defenders could detect approaching tunnels through specialised acoustic techniques. These galleries, hewn from solid rock and precisely positioned to amplify sound transmission, could detect digging operations at distances of up to 200 feet. The development of early gunpowder weapons in the 14th century forced fundamental changes in castle architecture that can be measured in specific dimensional modifications. Wall thickness increased from the typical 8-foot standard of the 13th century to 12 or 15 feet by 1400. Tower heights were reduced from average heights of 100 feet to 60 feet, while their bases were expanded to accommodate the recoil forces of defensive artillery. The first purpose-built gun towers, constructed at Bodiam Castle around 1385, incorporated mathematical calculations for optimal firing angles and overlapping fields of fire. The tower designs included precisely calculated embrasures that allowed maximum gun elevation while providing protection for artillery crews. These modifications required understanding of ballistics principles that would not be formalised in academic treatises for another century. Castle workshops developed into sophisticated industrial complexes that supported not only military requirements but also civilian economic development. The armoury at Warwick Castle employed over 60 specialist craftsmen during the 14th century, producing not only weapons and armour for the castle garrison, but also high-quality metalwork for export throughout Europe. The castle's forges could produce steel of sufficient quality for clockwork mechanisms, representing some of the most advanced metallurgy of the period. Textile production in castle-based communities reached industrial scale in some regions. The workshops at Kenilworth produced over 50,000 yards of woolen cloth annually during the 13th century, employing specialised workers in carding, spinning, weaving and finishing processes that required precise coordination and quality control. The economic impact of such operations extended far beyond the immediate castle community, supporting wool producers, dye merchants and transport networks throughout the region. The agricultural estates that supported castle communities were managed according to increasingly sophisticated principles that anticipated modern agronomy. The domain lands of Carefully Castle were organised into a 4-field rotation system that maintained soil fertility while maximising productive output. Detailed records from the 1320s show crop yields that averaged 4.2 tonnes per hectare for wheat, comparable to medieval productivity levels achieved elsewhere only centuries later. Livestock management on castle estates reflected advanced understanding of animal husbandry and selective breeding. The horse breeding programme at Warwick Castle maintained detailed genealogical records for over 200 animals, with breeding decisions based on systematic evaluation of size, strength, speed, and temperament characteristics. The castle's destriers, bred specifically for heavy cavalry service, commanded prices equivalent to modern luxury automobiles and were traded throughout European nobility networks. Castle gardens evolved from simple kitchen gardens into elaborate ornamental landscapes that demonstrated both aesthetic sensibility and horticultural expertise. The gardens at Kenilworth, expanded during John of Gaunt's residence in the 1370s, covered over 20 acres and included water features, topiary work, and rare plants imported from across Europe and the Mediterranean. The maintenance of these gardens required full-time staffs of professional gardeners whose knowledge encompassed botany, hydraulic engineering, and artistic design. Medieval astronomical knowledge found practical application in castle construction through the precise orientation of buildings for optimal lighting and defensive capability. The Great Hall at Conway Castle was positioned to receive maximum natural illumination during the winter months when court activities were most intensive. The calculations required for this optimal orientation demonstrated understanding of solar mechanics that was based on centuries of systematic observation and mathematical analysis. The integration of religious and military architecture in castle chapels required innovative solutions to structural and acoustic challenges. The Chapel of St. John in the White Tower incorporates architectural acoustics that amplify spoken prayers while suppressing external noise, achieved through precisely calculated stone carving that created resonance chambers within the wall structure. The acoustic properties were tested using techniques that involved systematic measurement of sound reflection and absorption. Medieval heating systems in major castles achieved levels of comfort that were not surpassed until the modern period. Conwy Castle's Great Hall included an underfloor heating system that circulated warm air through stone channels beneath the floor pavement. The Hippocaust system, adapted from Roman models but improved with medieval engineering techniques, could maintain interior temperatures 20 degrees above ambient during winter months, while consuming relatively modest amounts of fuel. The preservation of food in castle storerooms required sophisticated understanding of moisture control, temperature regulation, and pest management. The granaries at Caernarvon could store grain for up to 7 years without significant spoilage, using ventilation systems that maintained optimal humidity levels and stone construction that prevented rodent infestation. The design principles developed for these storage facilities influenced commercial warehouse construction throughout the medieval period. Castle libraries developed into centres of learning that preserved and transmitted knowledge across centuries. The library at Warwick Castle contained over 800 volumes by 1400, including works on mathematics, engineering, medicine, and natural philosophy that represented the cutting edge of contemporary scholarship. The preservation techniques used to protect these manuscripts included climate-controlled storage, specialised binding methods, and copying programs that ensured the survival of crucial texts. The role of women in castle communities extended far beyond the domestic sphere into areas of economic management, military coordination, and cultural patronage. Eleanor de Montfort's administration of Kenilworth Castle during the 1260s included oversight of construction projects, management of agricultural estates covering over 30,000 acres, and coordination of military operations involving thousands of soldiers. Her administrative records demonstrate sophisticated understanding of finance, logistics, and strategic planning. Female castle holders developed defensive strategies that often proved more effective than conventional military approaches. Dame Nicola de la Haye's defence of Lincoln Castle during the siege of 1217 employed innovative tactics that included the use of civilian populations for intelligence gathering, coordination with urban craft guilds for supply production, and diplomatic negotiations that divided attacking forces. Her success influenced military thinking about the integration of military and civilian resources. The education provided in castle households produced some of the most accomplished individuals of the medieval period. The household of Eleanor of Aquitaine at Winchester Castle provided education for over 60 young nobles simultaneously, with curriculum that included mathematics, languages, music, literature, and natural philosophy. The tutorial methods developed in castle schools influenced educational practice throughout European aristocratic society. Castle-based cultural activities reached sophisticated levels that challenged contemporary urban centres. The Christmas court held at Kenilworth in 1279 included theatrical performances, musical concerts, and literary competitions that attracted participants from across Europe. The logistical coordination required for such events involved housing over 2,000 guests, providing entertainment for audiences of different cultural backgrounds, and maintaining elaborate ceremonial protocols that demonstrated royal authority. Medieval tournament culture, centred on castle communities, developed into complex social institutions that combined military training with cultural expression. The tournament regulations established by William Marshall for events at Kenilworth specified equipment standards, combat procedures, and prize distribution systems that required sophisticated administrative coordination. The economic impact of major tournaments included expenditures equivalent to several £1 million in modern currency. The technological innovations developed for castle construction influenced civilian building throughout the medieval period. The geometric planning techniques perfected for castle layout were adapted for urban planning projects, monastic complexes, and major church construction. The mathematical principles underlying castle fortification design contributed to developments in engineering that would culminate in the Renaissance architectural treatises. Stone-cutting techniques developed for castle construction achieved precision that required understanding of geological properties, tool metallurgy, and geometric principles. Master masons could cut stones to tolerances of less than 1/8 inch, using tools that they forged and maintained according to specifications that represented centuries of accumulated expertise. The training required to achieve master mason status involved 7 years of apprenticeship and demonstrated competence in mathematics, engineering, and artistic design. The transport networks developed to support castle construction created infrastructure improvements that benefited entire regions. The roads built to supply Caernarfon Castle construction included over 50 miles of improved roadway, 12 new bridges, and upgrading of harbour facilities that supported commercial development for centuries afterward. The economic multiplier effect of such infrastructure investment contributed to population growth and commercial development throughout North Wales. International trade networks that developed to supply castle construction materials created some of medieval Europe's most extensive commercial relationships. The marble used in Edward I's Welsh castles was quarried in Purbeck, transported by ship to Bristol, then carried overland in wagons that required coordinated logistics involving hundreds of individuals. These supply networks established trading relationships that continued long after construction was completed. The military engineering knowledge developed through castle construction influenced the development of urban fortification throughout Europe. The walls of Carcassonne, extensively rebuilt during the 13th century, incorporated defensive innovations that had been perfected in castle design, including sophisticated gate systems, flanking towers, and integrated artillery positions. The principles established in castle fortification guided urban defence planning into the Gunpowder Age. Naval castle construction presented unique challenges that led to innovations in marine engineering and coastal defence. The sea castle at Portsmouth, built during the 1420s, included harbour facilities that could accommodate the largest ships of the period while providing defensive capabilities against naval attack. The engineering calculations required for construction in tidal environments demonstrated understanding of hydraulic principles that anticipated modern coastal engineering. The development of clock mechanisms in castle towers represented some of the most advanced mechanical engineering of the medieval period. The clock installed at Wells Cathedral around 1390 included astronomical calculations that tracked planetary movements, lunar cycles, and religious observances with accuracy that required sophisticated mathematical modelling. The mechanical complexity of such timepieces rivaled any contemporary machinery and demonstrated the integration of theoretical knowledge with practical craftsmanship. castle-based industrial operations achieved scales of production that anticipated early modern manufacturing. The iron production facilities at Kenilworth included blast furnaces that could smelt over 10 tons of iron per week, using water-powered bellows and temperature control systems that achieved metallurgical standards comparable to Renaissance technology. The economic organisation required for such operations involved coordination of mining, transport, fuel supply and skilled labour that resembled modern industrial management. The adaptation of Eastern architectural techniques in Crusader castle construction created hybrid building styles that influenced European architecture for centuries. The pointed arch systems used in Crac de Chevalier combined Islamic structural innovations with European decorative traditions, creating architectural solutions that were both functional and aesthetically sophisticated. These hybrid techniques were transmitted back to Europe through returning Crusaders and influenced the development of Gothic architecture. The preservation and restoration of medieval castles in the modern period has revealed construction techniques and architectural details that were previously unknown. Archaeological investigation at Kenilworth has uncovered evidence of sophisticated heating systems, sewage disposal networks, and water supply mechanisms that demonstrate levels of engineering sophistication that challenge traditional assumptions about medieval capabilities. Scientific analysis of medieval mortar samples has revealed the chemical composition of binding agents that achieved strength and durability exceeding many modern materials. The lime mortars used in castle construction included additives such as crushed brick, volcanic ash, and organic compounds that created chemical bonds of exceptional strength. Understanding these traditional techniques has influenced modern conservation practices and sustainable building methods. Digital reconstruction of damaged castle structures using laser scanning and computer modelling has enabled precise calculation of original architectural proportions and structural systems. These techniques have revealed the mathematical relationships underlying medieval architectural design and confirmed the sophistication of geometric planning methods that guided castle construction. The study of medieval castle construction continues to provide insights into sustainable building practices, structural engineering principles, and the integration of architecture with natural environments that remain relevant to contemporary construction challenges. The longevity and adaptability of medieval building techniques offer lessons about durability and environmental compatibility that inform modern approaches to sustainable architecture. The legacy of medieval castles extends beyond their historical and architectural significance to encompass their continuing role as symbols of cultural identity, technological achievement, and human creativity. These monuments to medieval civilization demonstrate the possibility of creating structures that serve practical needs while achieving artistic excellence and environmental harmony, providing inspiration for contemporary efforts to balance functional requirements with aesthetic and cultural values. In the gentle light of dawn, when morning mist clings to ancient stones and the centuries seem compressed into moments, medieval castles reveal their deepest truths about human ambition, creativity, and the eternal quest to build something lasting in a world of constant change. They remind us that our greatest achievements emerge not from individual genius, but from the patient accumulation of knowledge, skill, and determination across generations, creating legacies that continue to inspire and instruct long after their original purposes have been transformed by the passage of time. The quarrying operations that supplied medieval castle construction represented some of the largest industrial enterprises of their age. The limestone quarries at Caen, which provided stone for William the Conqueror's building projects, employed over 400 workers during peak production periods. These quarries operated year-round, with specialised teams working different levels of the excavation according to stone quality requirements. The finest ashlar blocks, used for visible wall faces, came from deep quarry levels where the limestone had been compressed under geological pressure for millions of years. Medieval quarrying techniques achieved precision that seems remarkable given the limitations of hand tools. Master quarrymen could split limestone blocks along natural grain lines, with accuracy measured in fractions of inches, using iron wedges driven into carefully positioned holes. The largest blocks extracted from Caen weighed over 12 tons and required teams of specialised workers using coordinated hammer strikes to achieve clean separation without fracturing the stone. Transportation of quarried stone involved logistics networks that spanned hundreds of miles. The Caen stone used in Canterbury Cathedral was loaded onto specially designed ships at Ouistreham, transported across the English Channel to London, then transferred to river barges for the journey up the Thames and Medway rivers. Each shipment required coordination between quarry operators, ship captains, dock workers, and overland transport crews, creating supply chains of unprecedented complexity for the medieval period. The seasonal rhythms of castle construction were dictated by climate constraints that required careful planning and resource management. Stone cutting and wall construction could only proceed during dry weather, typically from April through October in northern Europe. This limited building season meant that master masons had to complete structural work for entire sections of castles within single construction campaigns, requiring workforce management skills that rival modern project coordination. Winter months were devoted to interior finishing work that could be completed in covered workshops. Master carpenters, plasterers, and decorative craftsmen worked through the cold season preparing materials and components that would be installed when spring construction resumed. This seasonal workflow required maintaining skilled workforces year-round, creating economic relationships that extended far beyond immediate construction needs. The apprenticeship systems that trained castle builders created some of medieval Europe's most sophisticated educational programs. Master Mason apprenticeships lasted 7 years and included instruction in geometry, engineering, stone cutting, architectural design, and project management. Apprentices learned to use over 30 different specialized tools, each requiring specific techniques and maintenance procedures that took months to master. Mathematical education for castle builders included practical geometry applications that were centuries ahead of formal academic instruction. Master masons understood principles of structural engineering, load distribution, and architectural proportion that were based on empirical observation and mathematical analysis. Their knowledge of geometric relationships enabled them to design and construct buildings of remarkable complexity without the benefit of modern engineering calculations. The development of standardized measurement systems for castle construction contributed to broader advances in medieval metrology. The royal foot used in English castle construction was precisely defined and maintained through master measuring rods kept in major building centres. This standardization enabled prefabrication of architectural components and coordination between construction sites separated by hundreds of miles. Specialized building materials required supply networks that extended across international boundaries. The marble columns in Westminster Palace were quarried in Italy, shipped to London, and installed by craftsmen who understood both the geological properties of the stone and the architectural requirements of English royal buildings. These international supply chains required diplomatic coordination and financial arrangements that demonstrated the global scope of medieval construction projects. The preservation techniques used for wooden components in castle construction achieved longevity that exceeded many modern materials. Heart of oak timbers, selected for their density and grain patterns, were seasoned for up to 7 years before use in critical structural applications. Medieval carpenters understood wood properties so thoroughly that they could predict the behaviour of specific timbers under different loading conditions and climate variations. Carpentry joints developed for castle construction achieved strength and durability through techniques that combined traditional craftsmanship with innovative engineering solutions. The massive timber frames that supported castle roofs were assembled using complex interlocking joints that could accommodate seasonal expansion and contraction while maintaining structural integrity. These joints were cut with precision, measured in 1/16 of inches using tools that carpenters forged and maintained themselves. The ironwork required for castle construction pushed medieval metallurgy to its technical limits. The massive hinges that supported castle gates weighed over 200 pounds each and were forged from iron that had been refined through multiple heating and hammering cycles to achieve uniform strength and flexibility. Master smiths understood metal properties so precisely that they could predict the performance characteristics of individual iron components based on visual examination of grain structure and colour variation. Specialised iron components for castle defence included portcullis mechanisms that required precise manufacturing tolerances to function reliably under combat conditions. The portcullis at Warwick Castle weighed over 2 tons and operated through a counterweight system that enabled rapid deployment by small crews. The engineering calculations required for such mechanisms demonstrated understanding of mechanical advantage principles that anticipated Renaissance developments in machine design. The development of early firearms created new requirements for castle metallurgy that led to innovations in iron and bronze casting. The first castle-mounted cannons installed at Bodiam Castle around 1385 were cast using techniques that achieved bore uniformity and wall thickness specifications that required mathematical calculation of metal flow patterns and cooling rates. These early cannons could fire stone balls weighing 50 pounds with sufficient accuracy to breach wooden palisades at ranges of 200 yards. Gunpowder production for castle defence required chemical knowledge that combined theoretical understanding with practical experimentation. Medieval gunpowder masters understood the combustion properties of different saltpeter sources, charcoal preparation techniques, and sulfur purification methods that affected explosive power and reliability. The standardization of gunpowder composition required precise measurement techniques and quality control procedures that anticipated modern chemical manufacturing. The acoustic properties of castle construction were carefully calculated to maximize communication, effectiveness, and psychological impact. The great halls of major castles were designed with dimensions and proportions that enhanced speech clarity and musical performance, using mathematical relationships between length, width, and height that were based on acoustic principles discovered through systematic experimentation. Bell towers incorporated into castle construction required sophisticated understanding of acoustic engineering and structural dynamics. The bell tower at Warwick Castle was designed to accommodate bells weighing over 3 tons, while ensuring that vibrations from bell ringing would not damage surrounding structures. The engineering calculations required for such installations included analysis of resonance frequencies, structural loading, and sound transmission patterns. Castle kitchens evolved into complex industrial facilities that could prepare meals for hundreds of people simultaneously. The kitchen at Kenilworth Castle included multiple cooking hearths, specialised preparation areas, and storage facilities that required coordination comparable to modern commercial food service. The logistics of feeding castle communities during extended sieges required understanding of nutrition, food preservation, and supply management that demonstrated sophisticated organisational capabilities. Food preservation techniques developed in castle communities achieved remarkable effectiveness using methods that combined traditional knowledge with systematic innovation. The smokehouse at Carefully could preserve over 5 tons of meat annually using controlled smoking processes that required precise temperature and humidity management. These preservation methods enabled castle communities to maintain protein supplies during winter months when fresh meat was unavailable. Brewing operations in castle communities produced beverages that served both nutritional and social functions, while requiring technical knowledge that encompassed chemistry, biology, and engineering. Castle brewers understood fermentation processes so thoroughly that they could predict alcohol content, flavour characteristics, and storage requirements for different types of beer and ale. The brewing facilities at major castles could produce over 1,000 gallons of beer weekly, requiring coordination of grain supply, water quality management, and distribution systems. The integration of religious observance into castle life required architectural solutions that accommodated both spiritual and practical needs. Castle chapels were positioned and oriented according to religious requirements while serving as structural components of the overall fortification system. The chapel at Caernarfon Castle forms an integral part of the castle's defensive wall while providing acoustic and lighting conditions appropriate for religious services. Medical facilities in castle communities achieved standards of cleanliness and organisation that would not be surpassed until the modern period. The infirmary at Crac de Chevalier included surgical suites with specialised lighting, ventilation systems that prevented infection, and pharmaceutical preparation areas where medicines were compounded according to precise formulas. These medical facilities represented the integration of Islamic, Byzantine, and Western medical knowledge into comprehensive healthcare systems. The development of surgical techniques in castle medical facilities was driven by the practical requirements of treating combat injuries and managing the health needs of large communities. Castle physicians understood anatomy, wound treatment, and disease prevention with a precision that was based on extensive practical experience and systematic observation. Their surgical instruments, forged by specialised craftsmen, achieved sharpness and durability that enabled complex procedures with survival rates comparable to pre-antibiotic modern medicine. Pharmaceutical knowledge in castle communities combined traditional herbal medicine with systematic experimentation that led to effective treatments for common ailments. Castle physicians maintained medicinal gardens that included over 200 different plants, each cultivated according to specific requirements for soil, climate, and harvesting procedures. The preparation of medicines required precise measurement, timing, and quality control procedures that demonstrated sophisticated understanding of chemical properties and biological effects. The legal systems that governed castle communities developed into comprehensive frameworks for social organisation that influenced European legal development for centuries. Castle courts handled civil disputes, criminal cases, and administrative matters according to procedures that balanced traditional customs with practical requirements for maintaining order in complex communities. The legal records maintained by castle administrators provide detailed insights into medieval social relationships, economic transactions, and conflict resolution methods. Property rights systems developed in castle-based societies establish precedents for land tenure, inheritance, and commercial relationships that formed the foundation of European legal traditions. The complexity of feudal obligations, land grants, and service requirements created legal frameworks that required sophisticated record-keeping and dispute resolution mechanisms. Castle administrators developed legal procedures and documentation standards that influenced the development of civil law throughout medieval Europe. The diplomatic functions of castles required facilities and protocols that could accommodate international negotiations and ceremonial events of the highest importance. The Great Hall at Windsor Castle was designed to provide appropriate settings for royal ceremonies, diplomatic receptions, and judicial proceedings that required different spatial arrangements and symbolic expressions of authority. The flexibility of castle architecture enabled the same spaces to serve multiple functions, while maintaining appropriate dignity and grandeur. International marriage negotiations conducted in castle settings required coordination of legal, financial, and ceremonial considerations that demonstrated the sophisticated diplomatic capabilities of medieval courts. The marriage alliance between Edward I of England and Margaret of France, negotiated at Caerphilly Castle in 1290, involved legal agreements covering territorial rights, commercial privileges, and military obligations that required understanding of international law and diplomatic precedent. The tournament culture that developed around castle communities created elaborate social institutions that combined military training with cultural expression and economic activity. Tournament regulations established at Kenilworth specified equipment standards, combat procedures, prize distribution systems, and safety protocols that required sophisticated administrative coordination and technical knowledge of weapons and armour performance. Economic impacts of tournament activities extended far beyond immediate entertainment value to encompass manufacturing, trade, and service industries that developed to support recurring events. The tournament held at Kenilworth in 1279 attracted over 10,000 participants and spectators, creating economic activity equivalent to several £1 million in modern currency and requiring logistical coordination comparable to modern large-scale events. The armour and weapons industries that developed to support castle communities and tournament culture achieved technical sophistication that represented the pinnacle of medieval metallurgical achievement. Master armourers could forge steel plate that provided maximum protection while allowing complete freedom of movement, using techniques that required understanding of metal properties, human anatomy, and mechanical engineering principles. Specialised weapons for castle defence included crossbows with draw weights exceeding £1,000 that could penetrate chainmail at ranges of 300 yards. The manufacture of such weapons required precision engineering and metallurgical knowledge that enabled craftsmen to produce consistent performance characteristics in hand-forged components. The crossbow mechanisms developed for castle use influenced the development of mechanical engineering principles that would be applied to other industrial applications. The development of siege engines required engineering knowledge that combined theoretical understanding with practical experience in battlefield conditions. Master engineers could design and construct trebuchets that achieved consistent accuracy and range performance while being portable enough for campaign use. The mathematical calculations required for trebuchet design included analysis of leverage ratios, counterweight optimization, and projectile trajectory prediction. Artillery development in castle warfare led to innovations in metallurgy, chemistry, and mechanical engineering that influenced broader technological development. The earliest cannons used in castle defence required understanding of metal casting, bore uniformity, and combustion dynamics that represented cutting-edge technology for the medieval period. These innovations contributed to advances in industrial manufacturing, mining, and transportation that would accelerate during the Renaissance. The evolution of castle architecture in response to artillery development created new design principles that influenced military engineering for centuries. The star fort designs that emerged in the 15th century represented systematic application of mathematical principles to defensive architecture, using geometric calculations to maximize artillery effectiveness while minimizing vulnerability to enemy fire. These design principles established foundations for military engineering that would guide fortification construction into the modern period. Urban planning influenced by castle design principles created new approaches to city development that balanced defensive requirements with commercial and residential needs. The bastied towns built by Edward I in Wales and Gascony demonstrated systematic application of military engineering principles to civilian urban planning, creating towns that could function effectively in both peace and war while encouraging economic development and population growth. The influence of castle construction on ecclesiastical architecture extended beyond structural techniques to encompass spatial organization, decorative programs, and symbolic expression. Gothic cathedrals incorporated fortress-like elements that reflected the militaristic aspects of medieval Christianity, while demonstrating architectural and engineering capabilities that had been developed through castle construction experience. Monastic architecture influenced by castle design created religious communities that combined contemplative functions with defensive capabilities and economic productivity. Monastery complexes like Mont Saint-Michel incorporated sophisticated fortification systems that enabled religious communities to maintain independence while serving as centres of learning, cultural preservation, and economic development. The development of clockwork mechanisms in castle towers represented some of the most advanced mechanical engineering of the medieval period. Castle clocks required precision gear cutting, escapement mechanisms, and weight drive systems that demonstrated understanding of mechanical principles and manufacturing techniques that would not be exceeded until the Industrial Revolution. These timepieces served both practical and symbolic functions, marking the hours for castle communities, while demonstrating the technical sophistication and cultural refinement of their builders. Astronomical observations conducted from castle towers contributed to advances in navigation, calendar development, and mathematical understanding that influenced European intellectual development. Castle-based astronomers maintained systematic records of celestial observations that contributed to improvements in navigation techniques, agricultural planning, and religious calendar calculations. Their work combined practical applications with theoretical investigations that advanced medieval understanding of natural philosophy. The libraries established in castle communities preserved and transmitted knowledge across centuries of political upheaval and social change. Castle libraries served as centres of learning that maintained classical texts, supported contemporary scholarship, and provided educational resources for noble and clerical communities. The preservation techniques and organisational systems developed for castle libraries influenced the development of European educational institutions and scholarly traditions. Educational programs based in castle communities produced some of the most accomplished individuals of the medieval period. The household schools maintained by major noble families provided comprehensive education in languages, mathematics, natural philosophy, and practical skills that prepared young people for leadership roles in military, administrative, and cultural activities. These educational programs contributed to the development of European intellectual traditions and institutional continuity. The international networks created through castle-based diplomatic, commercial, and cultural relationships established communication systems that facilitated exchange of ideas, technologies, and artistic traditions across Europe and the Mediterranean world. Marriage alliances, military coalitions, and trading partnerships created connections that transcended political boundaries and contributed to the development of shared European cultural traditions. Artistic patronage associated with castle communities supported developments in painting, sculpture, decorative arts, and manuscript illumination that represented some of the highest achievements of medieval culture. Castle workshops produced artistic works that combined aesthetic excellence with technical innovation, creating cultural legacies that continue to influence European artistic traditions. The integration of artistic and architectural elements in castle design established precedents for comprehensive environmental design that would culminate in Renaissance palace complexes. The technological innovations developed through castle construction influenced industrial development, urban planning, and architectural design throughout the medieval and early modern periods. Construction techniques, organizational methods, and engineering principles developed for castle projects were applied to civilian buildings, infrastructure projects, and manufacturing operations that contributed to European economic and technological development. Environmental management practices developed for castle communities established precedents for sustainable resource use and landscape management that remain relevant to contemporary environmental challenges. Castle builders understood the importance of integrating human settlements with natural systems, creating developments that enhanced rather than degraded environmental quality while supporting productive economic activities. The cultural legacy of medieval castles extends beyond their historical and architectural significance to encompass their continuing influence on European identity, artistic expression, and cultural values. These monuments to medieval achievement continue to serve as symbols of cultural continuity, technological capability, and human creativity that inspire contemporary efforts to balance practical needs with aesthetic and cultural values. Conservation efforts for medieval castles have developed techniques and principles that influence broader approaches to cultural heritage preservation and sustainable development. The challenges of maintaining these complex structures while preserving their historical authenticity have led to innovations in materials science, structural engineering, and heritage management that contribute to broader understanding of sustainability and cultural stewardship. The continuing study of medieval castles provides insights into human creativity, adaptability, and the relationship between practical requirements and cultural expression that remain relevant to contemporary challenges. These structures demonstrate the possibility of creating buildings that serve immediate needs while achieving artistic excellence and environmental harmony, providing models for contemporary efforts to create sustainable and culturally meaningful architecture. Research into medieval construction techniques has revealed principles of structural engineering, materials science, and project management that continue to influence modern construction practices. The longevity and adaptability of medieval building methods offer lessons about durability, resource efficiency, and environmental compatibility that inform contemporary approaches to sustainable construction and cultural preservation. The social and economic systems that supported castle construction created organizational models and institutional frameworks that influenced European political and economic development for centuries. The feudal relationships, administrative systems, and economic networks that emerged from castle-based society established precedents for territorial organization, local governance, and resource management that continue to influence contemporary political and economic institutions. As the morning sun climbs higher, casting long shadows across ancient courtyards, and illuminating carved stone details that have witnessed 1,000 years of human drama, medieval castles continue to speak to us across the centuries. They remind us that our greatest achievements are not the product of individual brilliance, but of collective efforts sustained across generations, creating legacies that endure not because they were perfect, but because they were adaptable, not because they solved all problems, but because they provided frameworks for addressing the challenges that each generation faces anew. In their silent stones lies the accumulated wisdom of countless builders, administrators, and inhabitants who understood that true strength comes not from isolation, but from integration with the communities and landscapes that sustain us. These monuments to human ambition and creativity stand as permanent testimony to the possibility of creating works that serve practical needs while achieving beauty, functionality while expressing meaning, strength while maintaining harmony with the natural world. The story of medieval castles and crusades ultimately transcends questions of military strategy or architectural technique to encompass the broader human quest for security, meaning, and lasting achievement in an uncertain world. Their legacy lies not in their stones, but in their demonstration that human communities can create institutions, relationships, and physical environments that endure across centuries of change, providing stability and continuity while adapting to new challenges and opportunities. As we conclude this journey through 1,000 years of castles and crusades, we are left not with simple answers about the past, but with deeper questions about the present and future. What can these monuments to medieval achievement teach us about creating sustainable communities, meaningful work, and lasting relationships in our own time? How can we apply the lessons learned from centuries of castle construction to contemporary challenges of environmental stewardship, cultural preservation, and social organisation? The medieval castle builders who began their work with rough timber towers on artificial hills could never have imagined the sophisticated stone fortresses that would emerge from centuries of continuous development and refinement. Similarly, our contemporary efforts to create sustainable and meaningful environments may evolve in directions that we cannot now anticipate, guided by principles and values that we can only begin to understand. The patience required for medieval construction projects, measured not in months but in decades, offers a perspective on time and achievement that contrasts sharply with contemporary expectations of rapid results and immediate gratification. Perhaps the most important lesson from the castle builders is the understanding that truly significant achievements require sustained commitment across generations, patient accumulation of knowledge and skill, and willingness to build upon the work of predecessors while adapting to new conditions and opportunities. The sophistication of medieval hydraulic engineering becomes apparent when examining the water management systems that made castle communities viable in challenging environments. The cistern complex beneath Edinburgh Castle, carved directly from volcanic rock during the 12th century, could store over 400,000 gallons of water in interconnected chambers that maintained consistent temperature and prevented contamination. The engineering precision required for this excavation involved calculating optimal chamber dimensions, drainage gradients, and ventilation systems that ensured water quality during extended storage periods. Medieval engineers developed innovative solutions for lifting water to elevated castle locations that anticipated Renaissance hydraulic machinery. The well at Warwick Castle incorporated a sophisticated pulley system with counterweights that enabled a single operator to raise 50 gallons of water from a depth of 130 feet in under 10 minutes. The mechanical advantage calculations required for such systems demonstrated understanding of leverage principles and gear ratios that would not be formalized in engineering treatises for another 3 centuries. The development of mechanical devices for castle operations pushed medieval engineering capabilities to remarkable levels of sophistication. The Great Kitchen at Kenilworth Castle included rotating spits powered by weighted mechanisms that could turn joints of meat weighing over 100 pounds with consistent speed for hours without human intervention. These early mechanical systems required precision gear cutting and escapement mechanisms that demonstrated mastery of complex machine design principles. Castle drawbridge mechanisms evolved from simple timber spans to sophisticated engineering systems that balanced defensive requirements with operational efficiency. The drawbridge at Caernarfon Castle, spanning a gap of 60 feet, operated through a compound pulley system that enabled rapid deployment while supporting loads of up to 10 tons. The engineering calculations required for such mechanisms included analysis of structural loading, mechanical advantage, and dynamic forces that anticipated modern bridge engineering principles. The integration of defensive and domestic architecture in castle design required innovative solutions that balance military effectiveness with residential comfort. The solar chambers in major castles included sophisticated heating systems that circulated warm air through carved stone channels within wall structures. These early central heating systems achieved temperature control capabilities that were not surpassed until the development of modern HVAC technology. Privacy considerations in castle design led to architectural innovations that created comfortable living spaces within military environments. The private chambers at Windsor Castle included acoustic insulation systems that used multiple wall construction and strategic placement of tapestries and furnishings to ensure confidential conversations could not be overheard. These privacy measures required understanding of sound transmission principles and architectural acoustics that demonstrated sophisticated environmental design capabilities. The development of castle gardens as integrated landscape features required botanical knowledge and horticultural techniques that represented the pinnacle of medieval agricultural science. The gardens at Kenilworth covered over 30 acres and included specialised growing areas for medicinal herbs, culinary plants, decorative flowers, and fruit trees that were maintained according to systematic cultivation principles. The diversity of plants cultivated in these gardens exceeded that of most modern botanical collections and required understanding of soil chemistry, climate management, and plant breeding techniques. Medieval understanding of plant genetics, though not formalized in modern scientific terms, enabled castle gardeners to develop new varieties of fruits, vegetables, and flowers through selective breeding programs that spanned multiple generations. The apple orchards at Warwick Castle included over 40 different varieties, each selected for specific characteristics of flavour, storage capability, and growing requirements that demonstrated systematic approaches to agricultural improvement. Specialised growing techniques developed in castle gardens included greenhouse construction using glass panels imported from Venice, and heating systems that extended growing seasons and enabled cultivation of Mediterranean plants in northern European climates. These early greenhouse structures achieved temperature and humidity control through passive solar design principles and thermal mass systems that anticipated modern sustainable architecture concepts. The economic implications of castle construction extended far beyond immediate building costs to encompass long-term impacts on regional development, trade networks, and technological innovation. The construction of Edward I's Welsh castles required investment equivalent to over £400 million in modern currency and created economic development that supported population growth, urban expansion, and commercial activity throughout Wales for centuries afterward. Employment generated by castle construction projects created skilled workforce development programs that established craft traditions and technical knowledge bases that influenced European industrial development. The mason training programs associated with castle construction produced over 2,000 certified master craftsmen during the 13th century, creating human capital that contributed to cathedral construction, urban development, and architectural innovation throughout Europe. The standardization of construction techniques and material specifications developed for castle projects influenced manufacturing practices and quality control systems throughout medieval industry. The uniform stone cutting specifications developed for Edward I's building program required precision measurement techniques and quality assurance procedures that established standards for masonry work that persisted for centuries. International trade relationships established through castle construction material supply networks created commercial connections that facilitated technology transfer, cultural exchange, and economic development across Europe and the Mediterranean region. The stone trade between Caen and English construction sites generated shipping volume that supported maritime industry development and port facility expansion that contributed to broader commercial growth. The military engineering knowledge developed through castle construction influenced naval architecture, siege warfare, urban fortification, and artillery development in ways that shaped European military capabilities for centuries. The structural engineering principles developed for castle towers and walls were applied to ship construction, creating vessels of unprecedented size and strength that enabled transoceanic exploration and colonial expansion. Siege warfare innovations driven by castle construction requirements led to developments in metallurgy, chemistry, and mechanical engineering that had applications extending far beyond military uses. The trebuchet technology perfected for castle siege operations contributed to advances in construction machinery, mining equipment, and manufacturing processes that accelerated industrial development throughout Europe. The administrative systems developed for managing large-scale castle construction projects established organizational principles and management techniques that influenced governmental administration, commercial enterprise, and institutional development. The project coordination methods developed for castle construction required systematic approaches to resource allocation, workforce management, and quality control that anticipated modern industrial management practices. Financial innovations created to fund castle construction contributed to the development of banking systems, credit instruments, and investment mechanisms that became foundational elements of European commercial development. The bonds issued to finance castle construction represented some of Europe's earliest large-scale public debt instruments and established precedents for government finance that influenced state development for centuries. Record-keeping systems developed for castle construction projects created documentation standards and information management practices that influenced legal systems, commercial practices, and administrative procedures throughout medieval society. The detailed building accounts maintained for major castle projects provides some of the most comprehensive economic and social documentation available from the medieval period. The technological transfer between Islamic and European castle construction during the Crusader period created architectural innovations that influenced building practices throughout both civilizations. The pointed arch systems, defensive engineering techniques, and environmental control methods developed in Crusader castles were transmitted back to Europe and adapted to local conditions, contributing to architectural developments that culminated in Gothic cathedral construction. Cross-cultural exchange in the Crusader states produced hybrid architectural styles that combined European structural techniques with Islamic decorative traditions and Byzantine engineering methods. These synthetic architectural approaches demonstrated the capacity for cultural collaboration and technological innovation, even within contexts of military conflict and political competition. Scientific knowledge transferred during the Crusader period included mathematical techniques, astronomical observations, and medical practices that were integrated into European scholarly traditions and contributed to intellectual developments that would culminate in Renaissance scientific achievements. The libraries established in Crusader castles served as centres for translating and preserving classical and Islamic texts that might otherwise have been lost to European scholars. Medical knowledge developed in Crusader castle infirmaries combined European, Islamic and Byzantine medical traditions into comprehensive healthcare systems that achieved treatment outcomes superior to most European medical practice. The surgical techniques, pharmaceutical preparations, and hospital administration methods developed in these facilities influenced European medical development and established precedents for institutional healthcare that persist today. The diplomatic protocols developed for international negotiations in castle settings established ceremonial procedures and legal frameworks that influence European diplomatic practice and international law development. The complex marriage negotiations, territorial agreements, and military alliances negotiated in castle environments required sophisticated understanding of legal precedent, cultural sensitivity, and political strategy that contributed to the development of professional diplomatic services. Educational institutions associated with castle communities created intellectual networks that connected scholars, administrators, and cultural leaders across Europe and the Mediterranean region. These educational relationships facilitated the transmission of knowledge, cultural traditions, and technological innovations that contributed to European intellectual development and cultural unity. The preservation of classical texts in castle libraries during periods of political upheaval and social disruption ensured the survival of intellectual traditions that would be rediscovered and developed during the Renaissance. Castle-based scriptoriums copied and maintained thousands of manuscripts that preserved Greek, Roman, and early Christian learning for future generations. Artistic traditions developed in castle communities combined military, religious, and secular influences into distinctive cultural expressions that influenced European artistic development for centuries. Castle workshops produced illuminated manuscripts, decorative metalwork, textile arts, and architectural sculpture that represented some of the highest achievements of medieval craftsmanship. The integration of artistic and functional elements in castle design established aesthetic principles and decorative traditions that influenced residential architecture, furniture design, and interior decoration throughout the medieval and early modern periods. The combination of practical utility with artistic excellence demonstrated in castle construction provided models for comprehensive environmental design that anticipated Renaissance palace architecture. Musical traditions developed in castle communities created new forms of secular music, dance, and literary expression that influenced European cultural development and contributed to the emergence of courtly culture that would reach its culmination during the Renaissance. The patronage provided by castle communities supported composers, poets, and performers who created cultural works of lasting significance. The tournament culture that developed around castle communities created elaborate performance traditions that combined athletic competition with theatrical presentation and social ceremony. These events contributed to the development of secular entertainment, artistic patronage, and social ritual that influenced European cultural traditions and established precedents for public spectacle that persist in modern sporting and cultural events. Heraldic traditions associated with castle culture created symbolic systems and artistic conventions that influenced European visual culture and established identity markers that contributed to the development of national and regional cultural traditions. The heraldic displays that decorated castle architecture and ceremonial objects created visual vocabularies that communicated social relationships, political affiliations, and cultural values. The falconry traditions practiced in castle communities required specialized knowledge of animal behavior, training techniques, and ecological relationships that contributed to medieval understanding of natural history and conservation principles. Castle-based falconry programs maintained breeding populations of rare birds and developed training methods that demonstrated sophisticated understanding of animal psychology and behavioral modification techniques. Hunting practices associated with castle communities contributed to wildlife management, forest conservation, and ecological knowledge that influenced European environmental management practices. The hunting reserves maintained by castle communities preserved large areas of natural habitat and supported wildlife populations that would otherwise have been eliminated by agricultural expansion and urban development. The feast culture developed in castle communities created elaborate culinary traditions that combined local agricultural products with imported luxury ingredients to create dining experiences that demonstrated wealth, cultural sophistication, and social status. Castle kitchens developed cooking techniques, food presentation methods, and dietary practices that influenced European culinary development and established precedents for fine dining that persist today. Textile production in castle communities achieved artistic and technical levels that represented some of the finest achievements of medieval craftsmanship. Castle workshops produced tapestries, clothing, and decorative fabrics that combined functional utility with artistic excellence and demonstrated mastery of complex weaving, dyeing, and decorative techniques. The development of mechanical devices for textile production in castle workshops contributed to technological innovations that would eventually lead to industrial manufacturing methods. The spinning wheels, looms, and finishing equipment developed for castle textile production demonstrated understanding of mechanical principles and precision manufacturing that anticipated later industrial developments. Metalworking traditions developed in castle workshops achieved technical sophistication that represented the pinnacle of medieval craftsmanship. Castle armories produced weapons, armour, and decorative metalwork that combined functional effectiveness with artistic excellence and demonstrated mastery of metallurgy, precision manufacturing, and surface decoration techniques. The jewellery and decorative metalwork produced in castle workshops established artistic traditions and technical capabilities that influenced European goldsmithing and contributed to the development of luxury industries that supported economic growth and cultural development throughout the medieval period. Leatherworking and related crafts developed in castle communities achieved technical sophistication that supported military requirements, domestic needs, and commercial activities. Castle workshops produced leather goods that demonstrated understanding of tanning chemistry, manufacturing techniques, and design principles that influenced European leatherworking traditions and contributed to commercial development. The development of mechanical devices for various castle operations contributed to broader technological advancement and established principles of machine design that would be developed further during the Renaissance and Industrial Revolution. The windmills, watermills, and other mechanical systems developed for castle communities demonstrated understanding of energy conversion, mechanical advantage, and precision manufacturing that influenced subsequent technological development. Clock-making traditions developed in castle workshops achieved mechanical sophistication that represented some of the most advanced engineering of the medieval period. Castle clocks required precision gear cutting, escapement mechanisms, and timing systems that demonstrated understanding of mechanical principles and manufacturing techniques that would not be exceeded until the development of modern precision machinery. The astronomical knowledge developed through castle-based observation programs contributed to improvements in navigation, calendar development, and mathematical understanding that influenced European intellectual development. Castle astronomers maintained systematic records of celestial observations that contributed to advances in mathematical astronomy and practical navigation that would enable oceanic exploration and colonial expansion. Mathematical knowledge developed for castle construction and mechanical device design contributed to advances in practical geometry, arithmetic, and engineering calculation that influenced European mathematical development and education. The practical mathematics used by castle builders and engineers represented sophisticated applications of mathematical principles that were often more advanced than contemporary academic mathematics. The preservation and development of medical knowledge in castle communities contributed to advances in healthcare, pharmaceutical development, and medical education that influenced European medical practice and institutional development. Castle medical facilities served as teaching centres for medical education and research that contributed to the preservation and advancement of medical knowledge. Legal traditions developed in castle communities established precedents for property law, contract enforcement, and dispute resolution that influenced European legal development and contributed to the emergence of systematic legal procedures and institutional frameworks that persist today. Castle courts developed legal principles and procedural standards that influenced subsequent legal development throughout Europe. Administrative systems developed for castle management established organizational principles and management techniques that influenced governmental administration throughout medieval and early modern Europe. The systematic approaches to resource management, personnel administration, and operational coordination developed for castle communities provided models for institutional management that were adapted for various governmental and commercial applications. The diplomatic functions of castles as centres for international negotiation and cultural exchange contributed to the development of diplomatic protocol, international law, and cultural communication that influenced European political development and international relations. Castle-based diplomatic activities established precedents for international cooperation and conflict resolution that contributed to the development of systematic approaches to international relations. Economic development stimulated by castle construction and maintenance created regional prosperity, urban growth, and commercial expansion that contributed to European economic development and population growth. The economic multiplier effects of castle investment supported agricultural improvement, manufacturing development, and commercial expansion that enhanced living standards and cultural development throughout European society. The environmental management practices developed for castle communities established precedents for sustainable resource use, landscape management, and ecological stewardship that demonstrated understanding of environmental relationships and conservation principles that remain relevant to contemporary environmental challenges. Infrastructure development associated with castle construction contributed to transportation network improvement, communication system development, and urban planning that enhanced economic efficiency and social communication throughout European society. The roads, bridges, and communication systems developed to support castle operations provided infrastructure that supported broader economic and social development. The cultural legacy of castle communities extended far beyond their immediate historical period to influence European identity formation, artistic traditions, and social institutions that continue to shape contemporary culture. The cultural achievements of castle-based society demonstrated the capacity for human communities to create lasting cultural value while addressing practical needs and responding to environmental challenges. Scientific and technological knowledge developed through castle construction and operation contributed to European technological advancement and established foundations for subsequent scientific and industrial development. The practical applications of engineering, physics, chemistry, and mathematics developed for castle operations provided knowledge bases that would be developed further during the Renaissance and scientific revolution. The organizational and management principles developed for castle construction and administration provided models for institutional development and systematic management that influenced European governmental, commercial, and educational institution development. These organizational innovations contributed to the development of systematic approaches to complex project management and institutional administration that continue to influence contemporary management practice. As afternoon shadows lengthen across ancient courtyards and the warm stone begins to radiate the day's accumulated heat, medieval castles reveal their most profound truths about human persistence, creativity, and the enduring quest to create meaningful and lasting achievements in an uncertain world. These monuments to human ingenuity stand as testament to the capacity of human communities to combine practical problem-solving with aesthetic vision, creating works that serve immediate needs while expressing deeper values and aspirations. The legacy of medieval castle construction extends beyond architectural achievement to encompass broader lessons about human cooperation, technological development, and cultural preservation that remain relevant to contemporary challenges. The patience, skill, and systematic thinking demonstrated by castle builders provide models for addressing complex problems that require sustained commitment and collaborative effort across multiple generations. In their silent stones lies the accumulated wisdom of thousands of individuals who understood that true achievement emerges not from individual brilliance, but from collective effort, not from perfect planning, but from adaptive response to changing circumstances, not from domination of natural forces, but from creative integration with environmental systems. These lessons, embedded in stone and mortar, continue to speak across the centuries to anyone willing to listen to their quiet testimony about the possibilities and responsibilities of human creativity. The meteorological knowledge required for successful castle construction involves sophisticated understanding of local climate patterns, seasonal weather variations, and long-term environmental trends that influence building planning and architectural design. Medieval builders maintained detailed records of temperature fluctuations, precipitation patterns, and wind directions that enabled them to optimize construction schedules and select appropriate building materials for specific environmental conditions. Castle architects understood the relationship between building orientation and natural lighting with precision that enabled them to maximize interior illumination while minimizing heat loss during winter months. The Great Hall at Warwick Castle was positioned to receive optimal solar exposure during the shortest days of winter, while its window arrangements provided cross-ventilation that prevented overheating during summer months. These design calculations required understanding of solar angles, seasonal variations, and thermal dynamics that anticipated modern sustainable architecture principles. The development of specialized mortar formulations for different climate conditions represented one of medieval construction's most sophisticated technical achievements. Master masons understood that limestone mortars perform differently in various humidity and temperature conditions, leading them to develop region-specific formulations that optimize strength and durability for local environmental conditions. These mortar recipes, jealously guarded as trade secrets, included additives such as oxblood, egg whites, and various organic compounds that enhanced chemical bonding and weather resistance. Waterproofing techniques developed for castle construction achieved remarkable effectiveness using natural materials and chemical processes that were based on centuries of empirical observation and systematic experimentation. The roof systems at major castles included lead sheets weighing over 50 tons that were shaped and joined using techniques that created completely weatherproof barriers capable of withstanding extreme weather conditions for centuries. The understanding of thermal expansion and contraction in large stone structures enabled medieval builders to incorporate expansion joints and flexible connections that prevented structural damage due to temperature variations. The walls of Edinburgh Castle include carefully calculated gaps and flexible mortar applications that allow the massive stone structure to expand and contract with seasonal temperature changes without developing cracks or losing structural integrity. Foundation engineering for castles, built on challenging geological conditions, required understanding of soil mechanics, rock stability, and underground water management that rivaled modern geotechnical engineering. The foundations of Caernarfon Castle extend over 40 feet into bedrock and include sophisticated drainage systems that prevent water accumulation and frost damage. The excavation of these foundations required moving over 20,000 cubic yards of material using only hand tools and animal power. Site preparation for castle construction involved extensive geological surveys and soil analysis that enabled builders to identify optimal construction locations and avoid potential problems such as unstable ground, underground water sources, and rock formations that might interfere with foundation construction. Medieval engineers developed testing methods for soil stability and bearing capacity that were based on systematic loading tests and long-term observation of foundation performance. The quarrying operations that supplied castle construction materials required geological knowledge that enabled identification of stone types suitable for specific construction applications. Master masons understood that different limestone formations possessed varying characteristics of hardness, weather resistance, and workability that made them appropriate for specific uses within castle construction. The selection of appropriate stone for different applications required detailed knowledge of geological formation processes and mineral composition. Transportation of massive stone blocks required engineering solutions that pushed medieval mechanical capabilities to their limits. The largest stones used in castle construction weighed over 15 tons and required specialised equipment including massive timber sledges, rope and pulley lifting systems, and earthen ramps that enabled movement of extremely heavy materials using human and animal power. The logistics of moving such materials required coordination of hundreds of workers and careful planning of routes that could accommodate the weight and dimensions of transported materials. Construction staging areas for major castle projects resembled temporary industrial complexes with specialised workshops, material storage facilities, and accommodation for hundreds of workers. The construction site for Edward I's Beaumaris Castle included workshops covering over 5 acres, with specialised areas for stone cutting, timber preparation, metalworking, and tool maintenance. The organisation of these construction sites required management capabilities comparable to modern industrial operations. Quality control systems for castle construction involved systematic inspection procedures and standardised testing methods that ensured consistent construction quality and structural integrity. Master masons developed testing procedures for evaluating stone quality, mortar strength, and structural stability that were based on empirical observation and mathematical analysis. These quality control systems included regular inspection of work progress and systematic correction of construction defects. The development of construction machinery for castle building projects led to innovations in mechanical engineering that influenced technological development throughout medieval Europe. Castle builders developed improved versions of traditional construction equipment, including more efficient hoisting devices, better stone cutting tools, and sophisticated scaffolding systems that enabled construction of increasingly ambitious architectural projects. Specialised tools for castle construction required metallurgical knowledge and precision manufacturing that represented some of the most advanced craftsmanship of the medieval period. Master masons used over 40 different specialised tools, each designed for specific construction operations and forged according to precise specifications that affected tool performance and durability. The manufacturing of these tools required understanding of steel composition, heat treatment, and precision forging that anticipated later industrial metalworking techniques. Safety procedures for castle construction were surprisingly sophisticated and reflected systematic approaches to accident prevention and worker protection that were based on extensive experience with dangerous construction operations. Medieval construction sites included safety regulations governing work procedures, equipment use, and emergency response that demonstrated understanding of occupational safety principles that would not be formalised until much later periods. Accident rates for castle construction were documented in surviving records and provide insights into the risks associated with medieval construction operations. Despite the dangerous nature of the work, safety records for major projects show accident rates that were comparable to modern construction when adjusted for the scale and complexity of the projects. This safety performance was achieved through systematic training, experienced supervision, and careful attention to safety procedures. The seasonal workforce migrations required for castle construction created labour markets and employment systems that influenced economic development throughout medieval Europe. Skilled construction workers travelled hundreds of miles between projects, creating networks of professional relationships and technical knowledge exchange that contributed to the standardisation of construction techniques and the development of specialised craft traditions. Training programs for castle construction workers represented some of the most sophisticated vocational education systems of the medieval period. Apprenticeships for stonemasons included 7 years of systematic instruction in mathematical principles, geometric construction, structural engineering, and artistic design. These training programs produced craftsmen whose technical capabilities and artistic skills enabled the construction of architectural projects of unprecedented complexity and beauty. The integration of military engineering principles with civilian construction techniques created architectural solutions that influenced building design throughout medieval and early modern Europe. The structural engineering methods developed for castle walls were adapted for church construction, urban fortification, and residential architecture, contributing to the development of building techniques that enhanced both structural stability and aesthetic appeal. Siege warfare technology continued to evolve throughout the medieval period in response to improvements in defensive architecture, leading to increasingly sophisticated military engineering and tactical innovation. The development of gunpowder artillery in the 14th century required completely new approaches to fortification design that emphasised lower, thicker walls and angular bastions that could withstand artillery bombardment while providing platforms for defensive cannon deployment. The transition from medieval to early modern fortification design represented one of the most significant technological shifts in military architecture, requiring new mathematical approaches to defensive design and fundamental changes in construction techniques. The star fort designs that emerged in the 15th century were based on geometric calculations that optimized defensive firepower while minimizing vulnerability to artillery attack. Artillery development during the late medieval period required advances in metallurgy, chemistry, and mechanical engineering that contributed to broader technological development and industrial capability. The casting of bronze cannons required precision metalworking techniques and quality control procedures that anticipated later industrial manufacturing methods. These technical capabilities contributed to advances in bell casting, sculpture production, and precision manufacturing that influenced European technological development. The economics of artillery warfare transformed military strategy and influenced political development throughout Europe by making traditional fortifications obsolete, while requiring enormous expenditures for new defensive systems. The costs of adapting castles to artillery warfare often exceeded the original construction costs, and forced many noble families to abandon their ancestral strongholds or accept incorporation into larger political entities that could afford the expenses of modern military technology. Urban fortification projects of the late medieval period represented the largest construction undertakings of their age and required organisational capabilities and financial resources that only major political entities could provide. The walls of Carcassonne, rebuilt during the 13th and 14th centuries, required investment equivalent to over £200 million in modern currency and employed over 1,500 workers during peak construction periods. The development of bastioned fortification systems required mathematical knowledge and engineering capabilities that pushed medieval technical knowledge to new levels of sophistication. The design of effective bastions required understanding of ballistics, geometric calculation, and structural engineering that combined theoretical knowledge with practical experience in ways that anticipated Renaissance engineering achievements. Naval castle construction presented unique technical challenges that required understanding of marine engineering, tidal forces, and coastal environmental conditions that influence both construction techniques and architectural design. Coastal castles like Beaumaris were designed to accommodate tidal variations of over 20 feet, while providing secure harbour facilities and effective artillery positions for controlling maritime approaches. The integration of naval and land-based defensive systems required strategic thinking and technical coordination that demonstrated sophisticated understanding of military logistics and combined operations. Castle designers understood the importance of coordinating land and sea defences to create mutually supporting systems that could control both maritime and terrestrial approaches to strategic locations. Harbour engineering associated with coastal castle construction achieved remarkable technical sophistication and contributed to advances in maritime infrastructure that supported commercial development and naval operations. The harbour facilities at Caernarfon included sophisticated breakwater construction, dredging operations, and dock facilities that could accommodate the largest ships of the period while providing security against both military attack and natural storms. The development of lighthouse and navigation aid systems associated with coastal castles contributed to improvements in maritime safety and navigation that supported commercial development and exploration. Castle-based lighthouses included sophisticated optical systems and fuel management procedures that enabled continuous operation while providing navigation assistance for both military and civilian vessels. Weather forecasting capabilities developed for castle operations included systematic observation of atmospheric conditions and development of predictive methods that enabled castle commanders to anticipate weather changes and plan military operations accordingly. Medieval weather prediction was based on careful observation of natural indicators and accumulated experience that enabled reasonably accurate short administrative records from castle operations provide insights into management techniques, organizational systems, and personnel practices that demonstrate the sophistication of medieval administrative capabilities. These records show systematic approaches to resource management, personnel administration, and operational coordination that anticipated modern management practices and organizational principles. Correspondence networks maintained by castle-based administrators created communication systems that connected political, economic, and cultural centers throughout Europe and enabled coordination of activities across vast distances. These communication networks facilitated political coordination, commercial relationships, and cultural exchange that contributed to European unity and development. Diplomatic records maintained in castle archives provide detailed documentation of international negotiations, treaty development, and diplomatic protocol that reveal the sophistication of medieval diplomatic practices and international relations. These records demonstrate systematic approaches to conflict resolution and international cooperation that established precedents for modern diplomatic procedures. Military records from castle operations provide detailed information about medieval military organization, strategic planning, and tactical innovation that reveal the sophistication of medieval military thought and practice. These records include detailed information about troop organization, supply systems, and operational planning that demonstrate systematic approaches to military affairs. Cultural records maintained in castle libraries include extensive documentation of artistic patronage, educational activities, and cultural exchange that provide insights into medieval intellectual life and cultural development. These records demonstrate the sophistication of medieval cultural institutions and their role in preserving and developing European cultural traditions. Scientific and technical records from castle operations provide evidence of systematic approaches to engineering, architecture, and technological development that demonstrate the sophistication of medieval technical knowledge and innovation capabilities. These records include detailed documentation of construction techniques, mechanical innovations, and technical problem-solving that contributed to European technological advancement. Medical records from castle infirmaries provide detailed documentation of medieval medical practices, pharmaceutical knowledge, and healthcare organization that reveals the sophistication of medieval medical capabilities. These records demonstrate systematic approaches to disease treatment, surgical procedures, and public health management that contributed to advances in medical knowledge and healthcare delivery. Agricultural records from castle estates provide comprehensive documentation of medieval farming techniques, crop management, and livestock breeding that demonstrate the sophistication of medieval agricultural science and land management. These records include detailed information about crop rotation, soil management, and animal husbandry that contributed to agricultural improvement and increased productivity. Commercial records from castle-based trading operations provide detailed documentation of medieval commercial practices, market organization, and financial systems that reveal the complexity and sophistication of medieval economic relationships. These records demonstrate systematic approaches to commercial organization and financial management that contributed to European commercial development. Manufacturing records from castle workshops provide detailed documentation of medieval production techniques, quality control procedures, and technological innovation that demonstrate the sophistication of medieval industrial capabilities. These records include information about textile production, metalworking, and other manufacturing activities that contributed to technological advancement and economic development. Educational records from castle schools provide documentation of medieval educational practices, curriculum development, and pedagogical innovation that demonstrate the sophistication of medieval educational institutions. These records show systematic approaches to education and training that contributed to the development of European intellectual traditions and institutional capabilities. Religious records from castle chapels provide documentation of medieval religious practices, theological development, and spiritual life that reveal the integration of religious and secular activities in medieval society. These records demonstrate the importance of religious institutions in medieval life and their role in cultural preservation and development. Archaeological evidence from castle sites provides physical documentation of medieval life, construction techniques, and cultural practices that complement written records and provide additional insights into medieval civilization. Archaeological investigations have revealed details about daily life, technological capabilities, and social organization that were not preserved in written documents. Architectural analysis of castle structures provides detailed information about medieval construction techniques, engineering capabilities, and design principles that demonstrate the sophistication of medieval architectural achievement. These analyses reveal technical innovations and artistic accomplishments that contributed to European architectural development and cultural heritage. Environmental archaeology associated with castle sites provides information about medieval environmental management, landscape modification, and ecological relationships that demonstrate sophisticated understanding of environmental systems and resource management. This evidence reveals systematic approaches to environmental stewardship that anticipated modern conservation principles. Material culture studies of castle artifacts provide insights into medieval daily life, social relationships, and cultural values that complement documentary evidence and provide fuller understanding of medieval civilization. These studies reveal the sophistication of medieval material culture and its role in social organization and cultural expression. Comparative studies of castle development across different regions of Europe reveal patterns of technological transfer, cultural exchange, and political development that demonstrate the international character of medieval civilization and its capacity for adaptation to local conditions while maintaining broader cultural unity. Interdisciplinary research, combining historical, archaeological, architectural, and scientific approaches to castle studies, provides comprehensive understanding of medieval achievement and its continuing relevance to contemporary challenges. These integrated approaches reveal the complexity and sophistication of medieval civilization and its contributions to European cultural development. The continuing study of medieval castles and crusades provides insights into human creativity, adaptability, and achievement that remain relevant to contemporary challenges in architecture, engineering, environmental management, and social organization. These studies demonstrate the capacity of human communities to create lasting value while responding to practical needs and environmental constraints. Conservation efforts for medieval castles have developed techniques and principles that influence broader approaches to cultural heritage preservation and sustainable development. The challenges of maintaining these complex structures while preserving their historical authenticity have led to innovations in materials science, structural engineering, and heritage management that contribute to sustainable development practices. Educational programs associated with castle preservation provide opportunities for public engagement with medieval history and culture that enhance understanding of European heritage and its continuing relevance to contemporary life. These programs demonstrate the importance of cultural preservation and its role in maintaining cultural identity and continuity. Tourism associated with medieval castles provides economic benefits that support heritage preservation, while creating opportunities for cultural education and international understanding. Castle tourism generates significant economic activity that supports local communities while providing funding for conservation and educational programs. Research facilities associated with castle studies contribute to advances in historical scholarship, archaeological methodology, and interdisciplinary research that enhances understanding of medieval civilization and its legacy. These research programs provide training opportunities for scholars and contribute to the development of knowledge and expertise in medieval studies. International cooperation in castle preservation and research demonstrates the global significance of medieval heritage and the importance of collaborative approaches to cultural preservation. These cooperative efforts facilitate knowledge exchange and resource sharing that enhance conservation effectiveness and research capabilities. The legacy of medieval castles and crusades continues to influence contemporary culture, politics, and social organization in ways that demonstrate the enduring relevance of medieval achievements and their continuing capacity to inspire and instruct. These influences appear in architecture, political institutions, legal systems, and cultural traditions that connect contemporary society to its medieval heritage. Modern military architecture continues to reflect principles and innovations that were developed through medieval castle construction and siege warfare. The evolution of fortification design from medieval castles to modern military installations demonstrates continuity in strategic thinking and engineering innovation that spans centuries of technological development. Contemporary architecture increasingly incorporates principles of environmental integration, sustainable construction, and cultural expression that were pioneered in medieval castle design. The integration of functional and aesthetic considerations that characterize medieval architecture provides models for contemporary sustainable design and cultural preservation. Urban planning continues to reflect patterns of spatial organization and community development that were established through medieval castle-based settlement. The relationship between fortification, residential areas, and commercial districts that characterize medieval towns continues to influence contemporary urban design and community planning. Legal systems throughout the world continue to reflect principles and procedures that were developed through medieval castle-based governance and judicial administration. The integration of customary law, administrative procedure, and judicial review that characterize medieval legal systems establish precedents that continue to influence contemporary legal development. Educational institutions continue to reflect organizational principles and pedagogical approaches that were developed in medieval castle schools and their associated educational programs. The integration of theoretical and practical instruction that characterize medieval education provides models for contemporary vocational and professional training. As evening draws near and the last light of day illuminates ancient stone with golden warmth, medieval castles stand as eternal monuments to human aspiration and achievement. In their enduring presence, we find confirmation that our greatest accomplishments emerge not from individual ambition, but from collaborative efforts sustained across generations, not from domination of natural forces, but from creative partnership with environmental systems, not from the pursuit of temporary advantage, but from commitment to lasting value and meaning. These magnificent structures, born from the marriage of practical necessity and artistic vision, continue to teach us that true achievement requires patience, persistence, and the wisdom to build upon the foundations laid by previous generations while adapting to the challenges and opportunities of changing circumstances. Their legacy reminds us that in our own age of rapid change and technological innovation, the enduring principles of careful craftsmanship, environmental stewardship, and community collaboration remain as relevant and necessary as they were 1,000 years ago when the first stone was laid in the foundation of the first medieval castle.